Hey everyone, so today I'm going to show and explain the different glazes and go over some glazing techniques with you guys. We are going to go over our underglazes, our gloss glazes, and then our textured glazes. Alright, so before we start glazing, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we take our pieces and we run them under the water. Especially if you have taken sandpaper and sanded down the different outsides of your ceramic pieces. If you don't wash them down with water, all of the clay dust that comes off when you're sanding will mix with the glazes, and then they won't turn out and they'll be a little bit splotchy after they are fired in the kiln. So you just want to make sure that you run your pieces underneath the water and they dry really quickly. So that's one thing that you want to make sure that you do. The other thing is, as you're glazing, you want to be careful and grab the right brushes. You want to make sure that you either, for like larger areas, you might want to grab like a bigger brush to be able to brush that glaze on. For smaller, more detailed areas, you want to go ahead and grab a smaller brush. That way you can get into these smaller crevices, kind of like in here, but also like these little detailed areas so that your whole piece is covered. When you're glazing, you want to make sure that you cover all parts of your ceramic piece. The only part that you maybe don't need to worry about is the bottom. You can glaze the bottom if you want to, but if you don't glaze the bottom, that is alright as well. You just want to make sure that wherever you put your certain color of glazes, that's where it's going to be. If you make a little bit of a mistake, you can take some sponge and a little bit of some sponge and a water cup, and you can take that and wipe off the glazes from your piece that you are creating, and it'll pull some of the glaze off as well. Alright, this is just another tip for you guys to help keep you organized as you're glazing. Depending on what you are glazing, so let's say I am going to glaze this coil pot. I would have some sort of piece of paper. Right now I have like a sticky note, and I'm just going to write coil pot up here at the top, and then I'm going to write the different glazes that I'm using. So I'm using Intense Red, and I'm also using True Black. So once I have all of the red on this whole entire area that I want to paint red, which would include up here and also along down here at the bottom, I would just go ahead and give yourself like one tally mark for each coat that you put on, just because this is going to help you if you were to come in one day and glaze for a little bit and you don't remember which color you used or how many coats you put on of that certain color. If you write it down somewhere and put the name of the glaze and how many coats that you put on, you will remember whenever you come back in. So the first glaze that I'm going to go over is our underglaze. Our underglazes are in these tiny containers. They're on the top shelf of the cart. You have to put 3 coats of the underglaze onto your piece. So I like this bright color, this bright purple color. I just made sure that the name on the back of the chip matches the container that I found, and this is what I'm going to put on the outside of this little cup. And like I said, you need 3 coats of this. Alright, so you need 3 coats of underglazes, and then you have to put 2 coats of this green glaze on top of this underglaze. Okay, so 3 coats of underglaze, 2 coats of overglaze. If you do not put the overglaze on top of this underglaze, this will turn out to be a matte finish. So you want to make sure that you put this on so that it's nice and glossy. Alright, whenever I am glossing the inside, or whenever I'm glazing the inside of a container like this little cup, or even like my little coil pot right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the overglaze, which is in a giant green container. It's kind of hard to see. I'm going to move this a little bit. just so that you can kind of see the label. This is the giant green overglaze container that you will be using. And I just put a little bit of overglaze into one of these cups, and I am just going to literally pour the overglaze inside of here and kind of swirl it around to make sure it's evenly coated. And then I'm going to just go ahead and dump that overglaze out of my container. So I didn't get that little spot right there. I'm gonna pour just a little bit more into that, and once again go back in and dump all of that out. So it's completely coated, but there's not a bunch of overglaze just sitting in there, just like that. Okay? So as you can see, there's a little bit of overglaze dripping on this outside. So what I'm gonna do is take my sponge, dip it in my water, just like this, and I am going to pull that overglaze off of the outside of my cup. As you can see, it's disappearing, just like this. Just because I'm going to put my purple color now on the outside of this cup, so I don't want that overglaze out there yet. I will put it on top of the purple glaze after I'm finished applying that bright purple color. So now that I have that kind of washed off, all I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my underglaze, kind of give it like a little bit of a shake. And sometimes what you'll notice is that they need mixed up a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my brush upside down. I'm going to mix that overglaze a little bit, underglaze a little bit. Wipe off the excess. And then I'm going to go ahead and just start painting. And so I'm going to paint in one direction, just like this, and add that purple onto there. If you notice, I went this way to apply my coat, and then I kind of go horizontal to get that onto there, okay? This underglaze is pretty thick, but you want to make sure that you apply your 3 coats to this. So now that my underglaze is dry, I'm going to go ahead and apply 2 coats of overglaze onto the underglaze. And what you need is you need one of these big fluffy brushes like this, and you're just going to dip it into the overglaze, and you are going to just dab it just like this onto your piece. You don't want to wipe it on, you just want to dab it on to your underglaze, just like this. Once you have your first coat of overglaze on, you're going to need to let that dry, and then you can apply your second coat of overglaze on. And as long as your overglaze looks just like this, where it's nice and green and you can't see any color underneath it, then you are good to go. So it should also look just like the inside of the little cup as well. So the next type of glazes that I'm going to discuss are the gloss glazes. They are on the second shelf on my glaze cart, and for the gloss glazes you only need to apply 3 layers of the glaze, and that's it. These lines up here I'm going to paint red, so I found my intense red. I'm going to just go ahead and dip my brush into this glaze just like this and start to apply that on. When you're glazing, you want to make sure that you get into those little cracks and crevices and make sure that those are completely filled. You don't want to see any white left on your pot. And you also want to make sure that you let your glazes dry in between coats before you apply the next coat onto that. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep applying this red glaze on. If you see any like thicker streaks I would just go back over those and make sure there isn't any like super thick lines. And then, like I said before, you just want to make sure that you cover the whole entire pot and that you can't see any more white. Whenever you get to areas like this, it helps to just take your time and to slowly go over these areas, because I don't really want the red on my folds. And wherever the glaze is, that is where that color is going to show up. So if you accidentally get like a little bit of red, like if I were to get some red on these folds and didn't clean it with like a sponge and water, then that is going to stay there whenever it gets fired. So you just want to be careful as you're glazing. But these bigger areas, you can kind of just wipe the glaze on or brush it on just like this. But whenever you get into these little other areas that might be right next to another color, you just want to take your time, get a smaller brush, and just go slow. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about textured glazes. These are the textured glazes that I have. They are on the third shelf of my glaze cart, and these textured glazes have fun little designs whenever they are fired. You need 3 coats whenever you are using a textured glaze on your piece in order to make sure that you get like a nice solid texture and coating of glaze. So you have to use 3 coats. You have to put 3 coats on. There's also tiny little rocks in this textured glaze. They're kind of hard to see, but you can see them a little bit on this lid here. In order to get this sort of result onto your piece, you have to make sure that these rocks are present on your ceramic piece. So if you need to, you can use a spoon, because sometimes the rocks sit down here at the bottom of the container. Sometimes the rocks are just mixed in, so you don't even need to use a spoon. But if they're all down at the bottom, you can use a spoon to dig those out a little bit so that you're able to get those little textured pieces onto your ceramic piece. So I have my base layer going. And I'm going to add 2 extra layers after I put my first coat on. So that is my video on how to glaze. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and have a great rest of your day.